The massive chamber of the Galactic Council buzzed with the usual mix of alien voices and translation devices. Ambassador Zekar of the Vorthak Empire stood at the central podium, his scaled hands gesturing at the enormous holographic star map that floated above the assembly. The map showed thousands of star systems connected by glowing trade routes, each one representing decades of careful expansion and diplomatic negotiations between the various species that made up the galactic community. Honored council members, Zekar announced in his deep, rumbling voice. The Vorthak Empire requests permission to establish new mining colonies in sectors 847 through 851. Our surveys indicate rich deposits of rare metals that could benefit all member species through increased trade. The hologram zoomed in on a cluster of uninhabited star systems near the outer rim of charted space. Everything looked routine until the display reached a certain boundary. There it was, as always, a perfect sphere of empty space on the map, roughly 50 light-years across. No stars were marked inside it, no trade routes passed through it, and no colony proposals ever included it. The area was simply labeled in small, unremarkable text as Restricted Zone, Terra Sector. Most council members had grown so accustomed to seeing it that they barely noticed it anymore, like a piece of furniture that had always been there. The chamber's main doors opened with a soft hiss, and Captain Jake Morrison of the human diplomatic vessel stepped inside. He was a tall man with graying hair and the kind of relaxed bearing that came from years of routine diplomatic work. "Sorry I'm late," he called out cheerfully as he made his way to the human delegation section. Hyperspace traffic was terrible, near the Centauri junction. The effect was immediate and strange. The steady chatter of conversations died away as if someone had turned down the volume on the entire chamber. Delegates who had been leaning forward in their seats to get a better look at the expansion proposal suddenly found reasons to sit back. Even the usually confident Zekar seemed to lose his train of thought for a moment, his presentation stumbling as he tried to remember where he had left off. Counselor Veltara, an ancient being whose crystal body had witnessed centuries of galactic politics, quickly spoke up from her position at the High Council table. "Perhaps," she said in her melodic voice, "we should postpone discussion of expansion routes in that region. There are still environmental surveys to be completed." Her suggestion was met with immediate and enthusiastic agreement from representatives of species that rarely agreed on anything. Captain Morrison settled into his chair and pulled out a datapad, apparently unaware of the uncomfortable silence his arrival had caused. He seemed more interested in catching up on the day's agenda than in the expansion proposal that was supposedly the main topic of discussion. When Zekar finally managed to finish his presentation, the council voted to table the matter for further study, despite the fact that the proposed expansion was nowhere near the restricted zone. As delegates began filing out of the chamber, young Vorthak military advisor Crix remained in his seat, watching the crowd with sharp eyes. He had noticed the strange behavior, and more importantly, he had noticed that it happened every time humans were present. It was not fear exactly, at least not the kind of fear his warrior species understood. It was something else, something that made even the most aggressive species unconsciously step aside when humans walked past. Crix approached the human trade representative, Lisa Carter, as she gathered her materials near the human delegation area. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and the patient smile of someone who had spent years dealing with interspecies commerce. "Miss Carter," he said politely, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but I'm curious about human expansion plans. Your people seem to prefer staying within your current territory." Lisa looked up from her datapad and gave him that same patient smile. "Oh, we're quite happy with our current space, thank you. Humanity has always believed in developing what we have rather than constantly expanding. We have plenty of worlds to explore and improve within our existing borders." Her answer was pleasant and diplomatic, but Crix noticed that she had not actually said how large those borders were, or how many worlds humanity controlled. "I see," Crix replied, trying a different approach. "And your military? Surely they must have expansion recommendations like our generals do." He gestured toward where the Vorthak military advisors were discussing the rejected proposal with obvious frustration. Our military focus is primarily on defense and keeping our trade routes secure, Lisa answered smoothly. We've found that peaceful commerce serves our interest much better than territorial expansion. Again, she had answered without really answering. Crix was beginning to understand why human diplomats had such a good reputation in the council. Lisa excused herself and headed toward the exit. Crix watched the other delegates' reactions. A group of Althari representatives moved aside to let her pass, even though there was plenty of room in the corridor. A Nephrim trader actually changed direction entirely to avoid crossing her path. Most telling of all, General Morgath, one of the most decorated warriors in Vorthak history, suddenly became very interested in studying his boots when Lisa walked by. Later that evening, Crix accessed the galactic database from his quarters aboard the Vorthak delegation ship. He started with basic queries about human history and quickly discovered something puzzling. While the database contained extensive information about human trade goods, cultural exports, and diplomatic activities, it had surprisingly little detail about their military capabilities, population figures, or technological specifications, beyond what was necessary for basic commerce. Every major species in the galaxy had detailed military assessments available to their allies. The Vorthak Empire's fleet compositions were well documented, as were the Althari crystal ship technologies and the Nephrim gas giant mining platforms. But human military information was classified at levels that Crix had never seen before. Even basic questions like, how many ships does Earth's fleet contain, returned nothing but access denied messages. The young Vorthak stared at his screen in growing confusion. In a galaxy where information was power and transparency was essential for trade relationships, how had one species managed to keep such fundamental details secret? More importantly, why had everyone else apparently agreed to let them do it? As he dug deeper into the database, Crix began to realize that the empty space on the galactic map might represent more than just unexplored territory. It might represent something that the entire galactic community had chosen not to explore, and that possibility troubled him more than any military threat he could imagine. Crix spent the next several weeks diving deep into historical archives across multiple civilizations, using his position as a military advisor to access records that ordinary citizens could never see. What he found disturbed him more than any battlefield report he had ever read. Every major galactic civilization had the same peculiar gaps in their historical records, all centered around the same time period roughly 50 years ago. The Althari archives, normally meticulous in their crystal-perfect memory storage, had entire sections marked as corrupted data, recovery impossible. The Nephrim collective consciousness, which prided itself on never forgetting anything, had somehow developed blind spots in their shared memories from that era. Even the machine intelligences of the Synthetic Alliance had database errors that their logic circuits claimed were impossible. Most frustrating of all were the references to something called the Terran Intervention that appeared in fragments throughout various military databases. The few remaining pieces of information spoke of a demonstration of defensive capabilities and voluntary cessation of expansion activities by all parties. But the details that should have explained what actually happened were missing everywhere. Crix looked. Meanwhile, on the edge of human space, veteran Nephrim trader Captain Ben Foster was conducting routine business with his human contacts. Ben had been running cargo between species for over 30 years, and he prided himself on understanding the quirks and customs of every major civilization. But humans still puzzled him in ways that made his gas-filled consciousness uncomfortable. Tutkian. Trade meeting was scheduled for coordinates that appeared to be empty space according to Ben's navigation charts. When he arrived at the designated point, his sensors showed nothing unusual, just the normal background radiation and cosmic dust that filled the void between stars. But something felt wrong to his sensitive Nephrim perception of gravitational fields. Human Captain Alex Rodriguez materialized on Ben's view screen exactly on time, his cargo ship apparently uncloaking from some form of stealth technology that Ben's instruments had not detected. "Good morning, Captain Foster," Alex said with the friendly professionalism that characterized most human traders. "I have your medical supplies ready for transfer, and I believe you have those rare metals we discussed." The cargo exchange proceeded, smoothly, but Ben could not shake the feeling that he was being watched by more than just Alex's ship. His gravitational sensors, far more sensitive than those of most species, detected massive distortions in space-time around their meeting point. The readings suggested the presence of structures so large that they should have been visible to the naked eye, yet he could see nothing but stars and empty space. "Captain Rodriguez," Ben ventured carefully, "my instruments are detecting some unusual gravitational signatures in this area. Should I be concerned about navigation hazards?" It was a reasonable question between traders, and Ben hoped it would not seem too suspicious. Alex glanced at something off-screen, possibly consulting with his crew, before responding. "Nothing to worry about, Captain Foster. We have some research stations in the area that generate minor field fluctuations, but they're well within safety parameters for normal traffic." His tone remained friendly, but Ben noticed that he had not actually explained what kind of research required gravitational manipulation on such a massive scale. When Ben asked if he might be able to visit human space sometime to expand their trading relationship, Alex's expression became politely regretful. "I'm afraid our internal regulations are pretty strict about visitor access. We do most of our external commerce at border facilities like this one, but I'll be happy to continue meeting you here for future transactions." Back on his homeworld, Crix arranged a private meeting with General Morgath, hoping that direct military experience might provide answers that databases could not. The old warrior had fought in more campaigns than any living Vorthak, and his tactical knowledge was legendary throughout the Empire. But when Crix brought up the subject of human military capabilities, something strange happened to the fearless general. Morgath's usually steady hands began to tremble slightly, and his confident bearing seemed to collapse inward. For several minutes he said nothing at all, staring at the wall behind Crix as if seeing something that was not there. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You should not ask about such things, young advisor," Morgath said, still not meeting Crix's eyes. "Some knowledge is too dangerous to share, even among warriors." But as Crix pressed him for details, the old general's composure cracked just enough to let slip a few terrifying fragments. He spoke of the day the stars screamed and weapons that should not exist in any sane universe, before abruptly ending the conversation and ordering Crix never to mention the subject again. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a human xenoanthropologist studying alien cultures at a neutral research station, had begun to notice that she was being followed by intelligence operatives from several different species. At first, she assumed it was routine monitoring that all diplomats and researchers experienced when working outside their home territories. But the attention seemed more focused than usual, and she started to wonder what had triggered such widespread interest. During a casual conversation with her research partner, an Althari scientist known as Crystalline Song of Deep Spaces, Elena mentioned the unusual surveillance. Her colleague's harmonic communication patterns shifted to frequencies that Elena had learned to recognize as deep anxiety. Perhaps, the Althari suggested carefully, certain research topics are considered sensitive by security agencies. "Have you been studying any subjects that might be classified as military or technological intelligence?" The question seemed innocent enough, but Elena noticed that even asking it had made her colleague visibly uncomfortable. Elena realized that her presence alone as a human researcher was apparently enough to trigger intelligence-gathering efforts by multiple species. More disturbing was the growing awareness that her alien colleagues seemed to carry some form of collective trauma related to her species, something so deep that even friendly scientists could not discuss it openly. The breakthrough in Crix's investigation came when he accessed a single, overlooked transmission from 50 years ago that had somehow escaped the systematic purging of records. It was a brief emergency broadcast from a Vorthak fleet commander, transmitted in the final moments before his signal was cut off forever. The voice was filled with panic and disbelief as the commander screamed, "They're not using ships. They're using the void itself. How do you fight something that can turn empty space into a weapon? The laws of physics are breaking down around us. How do you fight something that—" The transmission ended in static, leaving Crix staring at his screen. In growing horror, whatever had happened 50 years ago, it had been significant enough to traumatize entire civilizations, and important enough to erase from official history. But now Crix was beginning to understand that the blank space on the galactic map was not just an unexplored region. It was a place that the entire galaxy had agreed never to explore again, and that realization filled him with a dread he had never experienced in all his years of military service. Crix's investigation eventually led him to the Vault of Memories on the neutral world of Sanctum, a place where the most traumatic and significant events in galactic history were preserved for future study. The facility was maintained by the Tao, ethereal race, beings whose extended lifespans and mental stability made them ideal guardians of dangerous knowledge. The elderly keeper who met Crix at the entrance was a being older than most civilizations, with eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless species. "Young Vorthak," the keeper said in a voice like wind through ancient trees. "You seek memories from the time of silence. These records carry a price that few are willing to pay. Knowledge once gained cannot be unknown, and some truths change those who learn them in ways that cannot be undone." The warning was delivered with such gravity that Crix almost turned away, but his need for answers had grown stronger than his fear. When the keeper initially refused access to the restricted archives, Crix threatened to petition the Galactic Court for a formal investigation into the historical gaps he had discovered. Only then did the ancient being reluctantly agree to open the sealed chambers, but not before making Crix sign documents that absolved the vault of responsibility for any psychological damage that might result from viewing the forbidden memories. The memory crystals were stored in a chamber so heavily shielded that even entering it required special permission from multiple galactic security agencies. As the keeper activated the first crystal, the room filled with holographic images so vivid that Crix felt as if he were actually present at the events of 50 years ago. What he saw there would haunt him for the rest of his life. The records showed the Vorthak Empire at the height of its military confidence, with Grand Admiral Thekvar commanding the largest invasion fleet in galactic history. Over 10,000 ships had been assembled for what military strategists believed would be a simple conquest of the mysterious human territories. Intelligence reports had suggested that humanity possessed only a few lightly defended colonies and primitive technology that posed no serious threat to Vorthak military superiority. The fleet approached human space with overwhelming confidence, their commanders already planning the division of conquered territories among the various military houses. Long-range sensors showed scattered human settlements that appeared to have minimal defensive capabilities, confirming the intelligence estimates that this would be a brief and decisive campaign. Then Admiral Sam Peterson appeared on the communication, channels broadcasting from what appeared to be a small, unremarkable human vessel. He was a calm, middle-aged man with the bearing of someone accustomed to command, but his ship looked insignificant compared to the massive Vorthak dreadnoughts that surrounded it. When he spoke, his voice carried no anger or fear, only a deep sadness that seemed inappropriate for someone facing an overwhelming enemy force. "This is Admiral Peterson of the Human Defense Force," he said simply. "You are approaching restricted space without authorization. This is your only opportunity to withdraw. We do not wish to demonstrate why the galactic community requested our isolation, but we will defend ourselves if necessary." The transmission was met with laughter from the Vorthak commanders, who saw nothing threatening about a single small ship facing their mighty fleet. What happened next defied every known law of physics and military strategy that Crix had ever studied. The human defenders did not deploy conventional ships or weapon systems. Instead, they began manipulating the fundamental forces of reality itself, treating space-time as if it were just another tool in their arsenal. Dark energy, the mysterious force that drove galactic expansion, was somehow harnessed and weaponized in ways that should have been impossible. Entire sections of the Vorthak fleet simply ceased to exist, not destroyed or vaporized, but somehow erased from reality as if they had never been there at all. Other ships found themselves trapped in localized gravitational anomalies that compressed them into points of super-dense matter. Most terrifying of all, some vessels reported that the vacuum of space around them had become hostile, with empty space itself attacking their hulls in ways that no shielding could prevent. The memory crystals showed Admiral Peterson's expression. During the brief conflict, and Crix was disturbed to see genuine regret on the human's face as he gave orders that eliminated thousands of ships in seconds. This was not the cruel satisfaction of a conqueror, but the reluctant efficiency of someone performing a necessary but unpleasant task. When the surviving Vorthak commanders finally managed to retreat, they found Dr. Carol Thompson, a human physicist, waiting to speak with them at a safe distance from the conflict zone. She was a small, elderly woman who looked more like a university professor than a military officer. But her attempts to explain what had happened only increased their terror. "We want you to understand that this was not aggression on our part," Dr. Thompson said gently. "Humanity has simply taken a different technological path than most species. While other civilizations focused on building better ships and weapons, we chose to study the fundamental forces that govern reality itself. What you witnessed was not advanced technology in the conventional sense, but rather a practical application of principles that most species are not yet ready to comprehend." Her explanation was intended to be reassuring, but it had the opposite effect on the surviving Vorthak officers. The idea that humans casually manipulated the basic forces of physics for defensive purposes suggested capabilities so far beyond galactic understanding that resistance would be not just futile, but meaningless. How could any conventional military force compete with beings who could rewrite the laws of reality as easily as changing a computer program? The final memory crystal showed the emergency session of the Galactic Council that followed the failed invasion. Representatives from every major species had gathered to discuss what they had learned about human capabilities, but the discussion quickly turned to how such knowledge could be contained. The consensus was unanimous and unprecedented in galactic history. Humanity would be granted complete territorial autonomy within their requested boundaries, with no questions asked about their internal affairs or technological development. All galactic maps would mark human space as restricted territory, and no civilian or military vessels would be permitted to approach their borders without explicit permission. Most importantly, detailed information about human defensive capabilities would be classified at the highest levels, with access limited to only the most senior government officials. The arrangement was not a surrender or a treaty in any conventional sense. It was a collective decision by the galactic community to pretend that the demonstration of human power had never happened, while ensuring that it would never need to happen again. The blank space on galactic maps represented not just unexplored territory, but a conscious decision to leave some things unexplored. As Crix watched the final images fade from the memory crystals, he understood why entire civilizations carried trauma related to humanity. The Vorthak Empire had not just lost a military campaign but had been forced to confront the reality that their understanding of the universe was fundamentally incomplete. Somewhere in that restricted zone, humans continued to develop technologies based on principles that other species could not even imagine, let alone comprehend or counter. Despite the terrifying revelations from the Vault of Memories, Crix found himself unable to abandon his investigation. The knowledge he had gained only raised more questions about human capabilities and intentions, and he convinced himself that understanding these mysterious beings was crucial for galactic security. Using his military connections and careful diplomatic maneuvering, he secretly organized a small reconnaissance mission with sympathetic members from various species who shared his concerns about the information gaps in their historical records. The team included Harmony of Distant Stars, an Althari scientist whose crystal matrix had been damaged during the original conflict, and who retained fragmented memories that the official purges had missed. Swift Current Through Clouds, a Nephrim pilot whose natural ability to navigate gravitational fields made him invaluable for detecting hidden structures, had volunteered despite his species' collective fear of approaching human territory. The expedition was completed by Collective Drone Designation 7742, a synthetic intelligence whose logical circuits demanded answers to the inconsistencies in galactic historical data. They approached the human border in a small research vessel equipped with the most advanced stealth technology that their combined civilizations could provide. The ship was officially registered as conducting routine astronomical surveys in uninhabited space, a cover story that would hopefully avoid attracting unwanted attention from either human patrols or their own government's intelligence services. Initially, everything appeared exactly as expected from the galactic charts. The region showed normal stellar formations with no obvious signs of habitation or military presence. Background radiation levels were within standard parameters, and there were no energy signatures that would indicate active technology or defensive systems. For the first few hours, Crix began to wonder if the human restriction zone was maintained more by reputation than by actual capability. Then swift current through clouds began reporting gravitational anomalies that defied explanation. His sensitive, nephrim perception of space-time curvature detected massive distortions that suggested the presence of structures so large they should have been visible across multiple star systems. The readings indicated that fundamental constants of physics were being actively modified in localized regions, as if someone was treating the laws of nature as adjustable parameters rather than fixed rules. Human Patrol Captain Roy Mitchell contacted them before their instruments had even registered his ship's presence. He appeared on their communication screen as a friendly, middle-aged man, with the relaxed bearing of someone conducting routine business rather than intercepting potential intruders. His manner was so casual that it took several moments for the reconnaissance team to realize how thoroughly they had been detected and tracked. "Good afternoon," Roy said with genuine warmth in his voice. "I'm Captain Mitchell with the Human Border Patrol. You folks seem to have drifted a bit off your registered survey route. Just wanted to make sure everything's operating normally with your navigation systems." His tone suggested nothing more threatening than a helpful traffic coordinator, but the implications of his easy detection of their supposedly invisible ship sent chills through the entire team. When Crix explained that they were conducting legitimate, scientific research and requested permission to document human technology for peaceful purposes, Roy's expression shifted from professional courtesy to something that looked almost like sadness. He was quiet for several long moments before responding, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that suggested he had dealt with similar requests many times before. "You seem like reasonable people," Roy said finally. "But I think you misunderstand what you're asking for. We didn't choose isolation to hide our capabilities from the galaxy. We chose it to protect the galaxy from our capabilities. The problem isn't that our technology is secret, it's that some knowledge is genuinely dangerous to know, even for peaceful purposes." To demonstrate his point, Roy activated a simple tool that appeared to be nothing more than a handheld scanner, similar to devices used by maintenance workers throughout the galaxy. But when he directed it toward a small asteroid drifting nearby, the effect was unlike anything the reconnaissance team had ever witnessed. The asteroid's molecular structure began changing at the atomic level, with the strong nuclear force that held its matter together being systematically altered according to Roy's adjustments. "This is a basic maintenance tool that our engineers use for routine construction projects," Roy explained as he casually transformed the asteroid from solid rock into exotic matter configurations that should not have been stable under normal physics. "The underlying principles are actually quite simple once you understand how nuclear forces respond to certain field manipulations. But if this knowledge spread to species that weren't ready for it, entire star systems could be destabilized by accident." Dr. Nancy Williams, the patrol ship's science officer, appeared on screen beside Roy to provide additional explanation. She was a young woman with the enthusiastic manner of someone who loved her work, but her words carried implications that terrified the listening aliens. "The thing about fundamental force manipulation is that it's not really technology in the conventional sense," she said cheerfully. "It's more like mathematics or logic. Once you understand the principles, the applications become obvious. But most species approach physics from an engineering perspective rather than a theoretical one, which makes them vulnerable to catastrophic errors." She gestured to a display showing various human tools and devices that looked deceptively simple, but apparently operated on principles that could revolutionize or destroy entire civilizations. "We've learned to treat certain types of knowledge like infectious diseases. They spread naturally through scientific communities, but not every species has the cultural or psychological framework to handle them safely." The reconnaissance team was escorted safely back to the border, but not before swift current through clouds observed something that would haunt his dreams for years afterward. In the distance, barely visible through their ship's enhanced sensors, what appeared to be a routine human construction project involved the controlled manipulation of a small black hole Workers in simple environmental suits were using gravitational fields like tools, reshaping space-time around the artificial singularity as easily as other species might use hammers and welding torches. They're using black holes for construction. Projects, Swift current through clouds whispered to his teammates in languages that their translation software struggled to process through his species' shock-induced communication patterns. They're treating one of the most dangerous phenomena in the universe like a piece of industrial equipment. As their ship crossed back into normal galactic space, Collective Drone 7742 attempted to process the logical implications of what they had witnessed. Its artificial intelligence, designed to handle complex calculations and seemingly impossible datasets, began experiencing processing errors when it tried to model the potential consequences of widespread human technological knowledge. The synthetic being's final report would later be classified at levels so high that only 3 beings in the entire collective were permitted to read it. Crix stared out at the stars as they traveled back towards civilization, finally understanding why the galactic community had chosen collective amnesia over curiosity. The humans had not demonstrated superior military technology so much as they had revealed that the universe operated according to principles that other species were not psychologically or culturally equipped to handle. The blank space on Galactic maps protected everyone from knowledge that could destroy them more thoroughly than any weapon ever could. Crix returned to the Galactic Council with his findings, but the weight of what he had learned had fundamentally changed his perspective on the situation. Rather than demanding answers or calling for investigations, he now understood that the conspiracy of silence surrounding human space served a protective function that extended far beyond simple political considerations. He requested a private audience with the Council's inner circle, the small group of senior representatives who had been present during the original contact with humanity 50 years earlier. The meeting took place in a secure chamber deep within the Council complex, shielded not just from electronic surveillance but from the kind of advanced monitoring technologies that Crix now knew existed beyond the restricted zone. Elder Counselor Prime Frequency of Ancient Wisdom, whose crystalline species had lifespans measured in millennia, served as the primary spokesperson for the group that had witnessed humanity's defensive demonstration decades earlier. Young Vorthak, the elder counselor, said in harmonics that conveyed both sadness and resignation, "We had hoped that the passage of time would allow these memories to fade naturally, but we understand that each new generation of leaders must eventually confront the reality of our situation, even if they are not prepared for what they will learn." The complete truth, as revealed by the council members who had lived through it, was even more disturbing than what Crix had discovered through his investigation. Humanity had not simply demonstrated superior military technology during their conflict with the Vorthak invasion force. They had casually revealed that they had solved fundamental problems that other species considered impossible, treating universe-altering discoveries as routine engineering challenges. During the post-conflict negotiations, human representatives had mentioned in passing that they maintained stable artificial gravity without massive rotating structures, manipulated time dilation for practical purposes like extending the lifespan of their food supplies, and treated dark energy as a renewable resource that could be harvested and stored like any other form of power. These revelations, delivered as simple statements of fact rather than boastful claims, had shaken the foundation of galactic scientific understanding. The fear, explained Counselor Veltara, her crystalline form flickering with patterns that indicated deep emotional distress, was not that humans would conquer us militarily. We realized that if human scientific knowledge spread freely throughout the galaxy, it would fundamentally destabilize every existing civilization. Species that had spent millennia developing carefully balanced technological and social systems could accidentally destroy themselves trying to replicate innovations that humans considered elementary. Captain Frank Roberts, humanity's senior diplomatic officer, arrived for one of his regular check-ins with the Council just as the private session was concluding. His presence caused the usual unconscious discomfort among the alien representatives, but now Crix understood that this reaction was not based on fear of human aggression. Instead, it represented a deep existential anxiety about human capabilities that operated on a level so fundamental that even friendly contact triggered psychological defense mechanisms. Frank was a soft-spoken man in his 60s who had spent most of his career trying to minimize the impact of humanity's technological advancement on galactic stability. When he spoke to the assembled council members, his words carried the weight of someone who had dedicated his life to managing a problem that had no easy solutions. "I know that our isolation policy seems unfriendly," Frank said, addressing the concerns that Crix had raised during his investigation. "But we've learned through experience that contact between species needs to develop naturally over time. If we shared our technological knowledge freely, we wouldn't be helping other civilizations advance. We would be short-circuiting their natural development in ways that could prove catastrophic." He gestured to a display showing human territorial boundaries that extended far beyond the official restricted zone marked on galactic charts. Every species in the galaxy has followed a similar path of technological development, moving from simple tools to more complex engineering solutions. Over thousands of years, humanity happened to take a different approach, focusing on theoretical physics rather than practical engineering, and that choice led us to discoveries that most species won't be ready for until they've had centuries more time to develop the cultural and psychological frameworks necessary to handle such knowledge safely. The conversation revealed that humanity's greatest fear was not invasion or conquest, but the possibility that their existence would accidentally trigger a galactic catastrophe. Human scientists had modeled the potential consequences of widespread adoption of their technologies, and concluded that most species would inevitably destroy themselves within decades of gaining access to fundamental force manipulation. "We're not trying to be superior or condescending," Frank continued, his voice carrying genuine regret. "We're trying to be responsible. Every technological civilization goes through phases where they're not ready for certain types of knowledge, and we happen to have developed capabilities that most species won't be prepared for until they're much more advanced than they are now." In the final part of their conversation, Frank privately showed Crix a restricted human star chart that revealed the true scope of their territory and defensive preparations. Hidden monitoring stations and protective installations extended throughout the galaxy, carefully positioned to observe and protect developing civilizations from threats they could not yet detect or understand. The chart showed that humanity had been quietly managing galactic security for decades, defending against cosmic dangers that other species were not even aware existed. Rogue artificial intelligences, reality warping phenomena, and aggressive species from outside the galaxy had all been dealt with by human forces operating invisibly beyond the borders of known space. "The galactic map ends at human space mine," Frank explained. "Not because we won't let others in, but because the galaxy couldn't survive what they might accidentally learn there. We've taken on the responsibility of being guardians, not through conquest or control, but by ensuring that dangerous knowledge remains contained until other species are ready to handle it safely." Crix finally understood that the blank space on galactic maps represented something unprecedented in cosmic history. Humanity had achieved such overwhelming technological superiority that their greatest act of mercy was voluntary isolation. They served as unofficial protectors of galactic civilization, defending not through military domination, but by carefully managing the flow of information and ensuring that developing species had time to mature naturally. The story concluded with Crix accepting his role as one of the few beings outside human space who knew the complete truth about the restricted zone. Like the council members before him, he would carry the burden of this knowledge while working to maintain the protective silence that kept the galaxy safe from its own curiosity. The humans would continue their patient guardianship from beyond the mapped boundaries of space, watching over civilizations that could not yet imagine the dangers they were being protected from.